out today to support a local photographer. Hans has been part of the museum for a long time, and you know, the one thing I will say is that you know, his last exhibit here was my first exhibit that I took down. So I was hired, and his exhibit was up in this space, and I had the privilege of taking it down, and that's when I first was introduced to Hans, and we've had a great relationship ever since. Not only through his photography work, but also with his work with the messenger and all that. So it's really great to have him back again at the museum and able to share his talents with the community. So a couple things. One, great way to find out what we're doing here at the museum is to become a member. There's multiple ways you can find out how to become a member. You can go online, you can do it all online. We've got pamphlets in the east entrance. I think there's pamphlets on the front desk. But when you become a member, you get some benefits, you get some discounts, you get postcards, publications sent out to you all the time, so you know what's happening here at the museum. Plus, you have the you know, you have the comfort to know that your money is being well spent, being able to produce shows like this one and then all the other wonderful programming that we have at the museum. So if you're not a member, consider to be a member. It really helps us do everything that we do here at the museum. Another way to find out what we're doing here is to go online. We try to put everything on our website, www.blanden.org. So you can find out information about the exhibits, about classes that we have going on down at our Art Education Center. And then also too, just follow us on Facebook. And we try to keep that up to date. You know, if we have to switch things around, like cancel classes or anything, all that's going to be on that Facebook page. So, and then also too, the last thing I'll mention is that we do have a YouTube channel. And so we record all of our artist talks, and we've been doing that since COVID. And so if you ever want to listen to Hans again, or other talks that we've had, you can go to our YouTube channel on YouTube, and you can find all those wonderful resources. So I think there's still like digital classes that we did when we couldn't have people in the building. We switched over to digital education type classes too, and all that's all there. So it's a wonderful resource for you. So I think that's all I have for housekeeping issues. Oh, and also too, make sure when you leave, and I'll mention this again, that you fill your bellies with all the amazing food down there. Otherwise, I have to take it home and eat it, or my kids will have to devour it. So, and they're kind of like locusts sometimes. But anyway, so like I said, it was a great honor to have Hans here at the museum exhibiting, and so I'll introduce Hans and he'll introduce himself, and then we'll kind of let it go from there. So come on up, Hans. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Hans, and I'm a film photographer. What's film? Eastman 5222. It's motion picture stock. Most famously seen in Schindler's List. Thanks, Nelson. Now I completely lost my train of thought.
What a freak for.
Hey, I love you. This is a little bit nerve-wracking here. I've got my wife and her daughter in the front row. I got one of my former bosses over here, another former boss over here, my neighbors, some really dear friends over here, a guy over there that sells me expired film. Once in a while he finds at garage sales and stuff. There's a pastor in the room, and bus drivers, and I couldn't believe this, but there's actually a retired judge here that I think he was telling me the truth. He flew in just for this, which I hope he doesn't bill me for the aviation fuel. It's really, really expensive.
Yes.
So. First off, I'd like to get some thank yous out of the way. because there's some, this would not have happened without, first and foremost, the Blanden, obviously, and Eric Anderson particularly. This is probably not the most cheerful show that the Blanden has ever hosted. And Eric offered me the space of the exhibit time without really knowing what I was going to bring in here for him to put on his walls. And when I told him what I was going to be bringing in, he didn't bat an eye at all. He just said, okay. So thank you, Eric. Thank you, the Blanden. The other person I'd like to thank is my love, my wife Carol over here in the front row. Carol is the financially responsible person in our household. She's the insert word here, responsible person in our household. Sometimes she has to act as my speech filter person, and I absolutely love and adore my wife. This trip would not have happened without her. So big hand for my wife. And there's another person that I'd like to thank that isn't, well, technically they are here. And that's my dad. When we stepped off the plane and stepped into the apartment, the first conversation I had with my dad was I asked him permission to do this. I would not have taken these pictures, I would not have done this photo essay if I had not had my dad's permission, if I had not had my family supporting me. It just simply wouldn't have happened. And so I thank my dad for that. And when I said Dad's here today, he is here in a couple of different ways. When we were there, the shirt was like, my mom was like, hey, you know, I bet that fits you. And it sure does. And they have different sizes in Denmark, apparently, because it's a 6XL. I really didn't think I was a 6XL. But apparently in Denmark I am.
Yes.
We're a nation of small Vikings.
Small, white.
The other the piece of Dad that's here today, and it's kind of a funny story. As I was working in the darkroom to print all these things, I was getting down to the very end, and they were printed in chronological order, just as they were displayed. And I was getting down to the end, and I finished cutting the mat and mounting the very last print, which is the one that flying Asian beetle just fell off of over there. So the last print in the series is a picture of my mom Carol at the cemetery where Dad is now buried. And I thought, well, I had an original, when I first was going to do this, I had the idea of including a little bit of something in every single photo. I decided not to. So at the very end, it was one of those breaks in the process. It was emotional, and I decided to go ahead. And so I went upstairs, asked Carol to join me in the basement, went in my office and got out the lock of hair that I had taken from my dad on the day that he died. And I asked Carol to follow me into the basement, and she starts following me into the basement, and my wife has the gift of gab, and so about halfway down, I was like, shh, please, quiet, somber thing here. And so we get in the in my darkroom in the workspace, and I get to putting the print together, and I unroll this bag, and I get my tweezers out, and I'm reaching into the bag to pull out a couple of hairs, and from behind me I hear this very, very loud, oh look, it's an IKEA bag.
Because they have IKEA.
Because in Denmark, an IKEA sells Ziploc bags with their own name on them. And I was like, really? You know, trying to have a moment here. You know,
You shouldn't have invited me.
there's Leonard Cohen on the stereo, and
Yeah,
you
it
know,
was very
trying to
funny.
have a moment here. And you know, a few minutes later, it broke the ice, it broke the tension. I realized that it was actually pretty funny.
Because you found out his mom.
It is indeed an IKEA bag. It
Yeah.
does say idea on it. So a brief history of me. I was born 58 years ago in Denmark. I was adopted into my family at the age of 5 months. They forgot to check the label to see what kind of a defective, deranged specimen they were getting, but they did return me when I was in my teens. Photography was something that I had an interest in starting in junior high. I bought my first camera when I was 14 with the proceeds from a summer of detasseling corn. And I was lucky, I had a mentor in high school. We had an instructor that actually understood photography. His name is T. Leo Lauber, still a friend of mine to this day. And he kind of took me under his wing. I eventually wore that camera out. Yes, you can wear out a Pentax K1000. It's possible. Run a film through it, you can wear out anything. After high school, I kind of got away from photography for a few years. Did the various dead-end blue-collar jobs thing. And eventually it was like, you know, I really don't like doing this stuff. I love photography. So I started trying to work my way into finding some sort of newspaper that would hire me. I had a particular affinity for photojournalism. That's what I wanted to do. And I ended up taking my first newspaper job at the Fairmont Daily Sentinel in Fairmont, Minnesota, which is a fun little town. It's 150 miles southwest of the Twin Cities and about 75 years in the past. It was really not a good fit for a guy that, you know, would occasionally come back from having attended the Pride Parade in Minneapolis. I left there and went to the Fairville Daily News in Fairville, Minnesota. I worked there for about 5 years until they decided to do some corporate restructuring. I was part of that restructuring. So I did some other stuff for about a year, and then eventually I took a job here at the Fort Dodge Messenger in 2005. And that lasted until COVID came along and pretty much torpedoed the place and torpedoed a lot of other newspapers. The industry was hit really, really hard. I still freelance for the publication and do other work. But since then I've had a couple of career changes to other jobs, one of which was driving a school bus for a couple of years, which was a career that I deeply loved. Made some good friends. There's 2 guys here today that drive buses. Those guys deserve a hand because some of the kids
You're retired.
some of y'all's kids are jerks.
Tell them like it is, Brack.
Yeah, and frickin' frack story, wonderful thing. If I had a little more time, I get into it. Ask me later. Brass Nelson, it's a great story. And after that, we had some other lifestyle changes and went back to Iowa Central, got my Class A CDL, and now driving a semi for a living.
He's listening, he's just flying around.
What was in the punch? Revenge. Maria's still mad that I stomped one of the Beatles. So that kind of brings me up to today. Now, I'd like to talk a little bit about my dad. My dad was born in March 2nd, 1934. Passed away on July 17th, 2023. And he packed an interesting life into those years. Denmark was occupied by the Germans during World War II. And my dad and my mom both have very vivid memories of those years. Dad's kind of lucky that he made it through. Him and a group of friends were the target of a drunk German in a sidecar motorcycle decided to empty a machine gun in the general direction. I remember him telling me stories about it. The bullets whistling through the air and you could hear them hitting things. Fortunately, neither him or his friends were hurt in that. After he finished his peacetime stint in the Danish military, he married my mom, and he took a apprenticeship as a plumber. And he eventually achieved and passed his master's test, his license. This thing here, probably going, why is this thing up here? What is this thing? That was Dad's apprenticeship test. This is built with hand tools, soldering iron. And he had to draw the plans, he had to build it, he had to turn it in, get graded on it. And there's a stamp here on the bottom that says this was done in, reading glasses are at home. Anyway, 1956, I think. And we have other objects that he made that were tests for various levels for his journeyman's test and his master's test. Dad was a craftsman. And this is one of those things that I saved for years and years. He thought it was junk, it should be thrown away, but I kept it because it taught me, every time I look at it, I think about my dad's work habits and I think about his work ethics. And when he asked me why I wanted it, that was one of the things I told him. I said, it reminds me of your work ethics, your work habits. And he looked at me and he must have remembered what I was like as a teenager working with him. I didn't have a whole hell of a lot of that. You know, I was really not a very good employee of my dad. And I go, no, I was watching, I was paying attention. And later in life, when I decided to grow up a little bit, I still remembered that. In '75, our family moved to the United States. We went to a small town in central Nebraska called Ord, O-R-D. And a legitimate question at this point is, why in the hell, of all the places that a family could go in the United States, it's a pretty big oyster, would you go to Ord, Nebraska? And the answer to that is my grandmother was already here. She had, through convoluted steps, met a guy that was back in Denmark on vacation, that lived here, they got married, they moved over to the States. They settled in this little town because that's where he was, and shortly after she took her citizenship and they got settled in, he died. So that's where Dad started his own business shortly after we got here. I still have one of the gimme caps that he had. And funny story about this is after my parents decided to move back to Denmark in the early 90s, I started looking for things that my dad had given away in the business, you know, all those little gimmicks and things. And I had a hard time finding anything. You just don't hold on to stuff like that. And we were home on this trip. I was helping my mom clear out some stuff, and we found this box down in the storage room, and it was full of hats. My dad was a pack rat. He would save almost anything. So he had this enormous box just full of baseball caps that nobody in Denmark wears. And there was a cap from, you know, Reed water heaters, and there was a cap from the place he bought his pipes from and all this stuff. So there were about 6 of these things. And I was like, finally. And then we had family over, and 5 of them went with family members, so I got to keep one of them.
So you're in Nebraska.
So I'm in Nebraska. I'm not.
For the purposes of this story.
Anyway, like I said, our family settled in Nebraska. My sister and I kind of went other ways to other states. And my mom and dad decided in the early 90s to move back to Denmark. After they got back, we checked in with the local authorities, whatever you want to call it. And they took one look at him and said, you know, we know you brought toolboxes and you could almost start your own plumbing business with the stuff you brought back here, but we're not letting you work, you're retired. Go see a doctor, go get this taken care of. At that time I was a little bit worried about my dad. I didn't know if a man who had entire life accumulated enough actual days out sick that you can count them on one hand was going to deal very well with retirement. But as it turned out, he took to it like a duck to water. And he got involved with the steering committee in the apartment complex they lived in. He got involved with a group of other older guys that got together and built things in a shop, and went on trips, and things like that. I should have put my notes in chronological order.
So, what was your dad's name?
It's kind of funny because I've been, as I'm driving my truck around, you got a lot of what we call windshield time. You know, you're just sitting there holding the steering wheel, trying not to run a Prius off the road.
Okay.
And so you just kind of sit there and you go through and you run through your head what you want to say. And yesterday I thought, you know, it might be a good idea if I actually asked somebody what they wanted to hear about. What should I talk about up here? Because I can literally stand up here and drone on for 4 hours at the minutia of film processing. But nobody came here to hear that. At least I hope they didn't. So I asked my wife, I says, if you're in the audience, what are some things that you want to hear about? What would you like to hear me talk about? And the first thing she said was, why? The why of this. And it kind of kept me up last night trying to answer that question, because really, how many people do this? How many people have a relative that's basically in the last stage of hospice and show up with a bag full of Leica cameras and start making pictures? How many people actually think to do that? And it's not very few. It's sort of odd. You pretty much have to be a photographer to really understand doing that. And the only answer that I could really come up with for her was that it never occurred to me not to. It never occurred to me not to do this document, not to do this photo essay. Photography for me is a way to vicariously deal with the world and to delay my response to things that are going on around me. So as these events were unfolding, a camera in front of me served as a shield. It serves as protection from what was going on. And as a result of that, the things that were going on, I did not feel them as intensely while they were happening as I did later. When we got back to the States, I had 50-some rolls of film to deal with. The first thing you do is process them. And every time I'd pull film out of the water and look at it, hold up to the light, see what I was there, I'd see some of those scenes again. And it brought me right back there. And bringing them back and seeing them like that, then I felt it the second time. And when I edited the film, when I sat down on a light box and looked at all the frames and marked off the ones I thought I should scan, felt it again. And so each of these steps became reliving it, but it became my grief process, my way of working through this. And I got to a point where I reached my limit. I got everything processed, everything edited, everything scanned, and I just had to stop. So it got put away for a while. And the other images that I shot on the trip, the street photography that I did, things like that, I went ahead and finished that work up, and it's posted on my Facebook page. But the stuff I had to put away, and I admit to being a bit of a procrastinator and being a bit of a last-minute guy. Never blown a deadline, though. I paid you a lot of money, not to say.
Check bounced.
Oh. So it was within about the last 2 or 3 months that I knew that the show was coming up. I had to pick this back up and start working with it again. That meant pulling up all those raw scans, toning them, sorting them out, deciding what 20 pictures were going to go in the show. And that is for a photographer, that's a surprisingly painful process. There's a lot of images that you end up taking that might mean something deeply personal to you, but when a stranger looks at them, there's nothing there that connects them. And vice versa. There's things that people look at and they see something that I don't. And that's okay, that's the way it should be. We're all wired just a little bit differently. We'll process information just a little bit differently. And so the process of doing this show has really been inseparable from the grief process. The show is the grief process, and then the grief process is the show. I'm glad today that I can still react to some of these images, because if these images had gotten to the point in my heart where they were just technical problems to solve, I should probably hang it up, both as a photographer and as a human being. Because you ever stop feeling you should find something else to do. And one of the things that I've really enjoyed is being able to just kind of sit here and watch people walk through and ask people what they thought. And a friend of mine, she couldn't stay for the talk, and she came up and saw it. We met going down the stairs, and she goes, "You didn't warn me I was going to cry." And I said, "I'm sorry, but I figured you kind of probably would know that." So I've had a lot of different reactions from people that have seen the work. And my intention was never to depress the entire Fort Dodge community. That's not my intention. My intention here is to honor my father's memory and to honor the beautiful way that my father got to die. As you follow the photos around, you'll notice that we start out at home in my parents' apartment, and we go to the hospital after he got sick at home, and then we come back home. And if you're going to make a checklist of things you want when you are getting ready to leave our mortal coil, being at home, being surrounded by family, being pain-free, being anxiety-free, and being coherent up until probably the last 24 hours or so are probably things you'd put on that checklist. And my father got all those things. He was gifted that. Can I answer that? Those things were gifted to my father by whatever power it is that runs the universe. That we were able to be there was gifted to me by whatever powers run the universe. We bought our plane tickets 3 months in advance. We bought them when we found out Dad was sick, that it was terminal. He had liver cancer, by the way, if I mentioned that or not. But he called, and I called him on his birthday. And he says, "Call me a couple days later." So I called him a couple days later. And the first thing he says is, "By the way, you need to know this, me and Mom have donated our bodies to science," which is a really strange way of starting out a conversation. But my parents are like that. They have a tendency to save the important stuff for later. My mom once called me and we were talking, and the conversation went on for about 20 minutes, and finally She goes, oh yeah, I almost forgot to tell you, your aunt died 3 times. Really, what happened? So it turned out my aunt had died and been resuscitated several times. And the last time they had decided just to let her go, she's laying on a gurney in the emergency room, the family's all there, and all of a sudden the woman sits up and says, hey, what's going on? Where are we here? I thought I had a normal family once upon a time. So when Dad told me to call, he goes on about how this institute works and, you know, what they're going to do with all his specimens or whatnot. And then he goes, yeah, I've got liver cancer and I'm just opting for them to keep me comfortable. And I go, you probably should have told me that first. I went home and I asked Carol to drop the hammer on the tickets that we had in the cart. But I think there was something divine involved here because the way it worked out, we had 21 days in Denmark. Dad died on the 10th day. That's as close to the middle as you can come without a stopwatch. The 10 days of Dad leaving and then the first 11 days of Mom's by herself. And some of the essay covers that a little bit. One of the things that surprised me is that in Denmark, funeral customs are a little bit different than they are here. I didn't realize how snarky it sounded when I wrote it, but one of these customs I refer to embalming as a vile practice or a disgusting practice. I could probably couch my words a little bit, but I do believe that that's true. It's not practiced in Denmark. Very few people are embalmed. That was certainly the case with Dad. When the funeral director came to pick him up, my mind's eye had this nightmare picture of a gurney and a body bag. I've seen that picture. I've lived that picture with other relatives, and it's not a good thing to leave the death of a loved one with. Instead, what they did was they wheeled up the whole casket. And if you look at the picture, you'll see that it's not the casket like we have here. It's basically a simple wooden box. And the bottom of that wooden box is lined with wood chips. And then there's a plain white blanket on top of the wood chips. And when she brought that in and she took the lid off, the smell was absolutely incredible. It's like waking up in the Black Hills and smelling the pine trees. It was just this super, just beautiful aroma. And that's what Dad was laid into. Was all these wood shapings and this blanket. And we stuffed his comforter around him. And the funeral director saw Mom's flowers out on the deck. And she went out and picked some. Those are the flowers that are on his casket. They came from the deck. She went out and picked those. The other photo you'll see over here, Carol's sitting next to Dad. There's candles on the table. It still baffles me that in a country where candles are used just about everywhere, every day for something, including being put on live Christmas trees. Yes, they have a lot of December structure fires. That my mom didn't have any real candles, electric candles, battery operated electric candles, but that is an old custom. And the candles are there to light the way for the dead person. And then you open the windows so they can get out. And we had the windows open. Everyone started gathering. All the family started gathering. And we ended up just, everybody came in, talked to Dad for a few minutes, spent a few minutes with him. And we sat down and had coffee and just sat and talked about Dad. It was probably the first time in years that our entire family's been together like that. And once again, I almost started the apartment on fire. My dad has a wooden cutting block that sits over the stovetop burners. I leaned up against one of the knobs and turned it on. The next thing you know, there's smoke pouring out of this thing, and you know, so. But the point of that is, no one was the least bit upset by the fact that my dad on his deathbed looked like an emaciated 89-year-old orange-skinned man that just died from liver cancer. There was none of the artificiality that you find in the American funeral customs, where your funeral home won't let you see that, or will try to let you not see that. And instead, they want you to have a memory picture, which means plumped up with embalming fluid, makeup, nice shirt laid out in the casket. I really don't care for that at all. I prefer the reality. You don't hear as many euphemisms in Denmark either for death and dying. People just call it what it is. In fact, the Danish word for cremation is pant. It means burned, literally. The word for creation really describes the act itself. Once your burial takes place, there are very few, like I said, almost no embalming is done. Most people are cremated. There are a few people that opt for full body burials, and that's hideously expensive because there's not a lot of land in Denmark. So what are they going to use it for? Build houses on it, they're going to grow crops on it, they're going to make parks. They're not going to put bodies in it. And so when you get a spot, you lease it. You're not buying it. It's not yours. It's a leased plot. And so when you visit a cemetery in Denmark, you'll find that some of the graves have these little signs on them. And it's noticed from the cemetery telling the family that if you don't renew the lease, someone else gets this. And so if you bought a plot for grandma, chances are, depending on how old the cemetery is, there was probably at least 15 or 16 other grandmas and uncles and brothers that shared that space. And at the end of those leases, there's nothing left in the hole anyway. The burials aren't very deep. It's, the climate is mild. We have really active, wonderful earthworms. There's really not much left. I have a feeling I should maybe get back on a little more cheerful track here.
Why don't you tell them what your dad's name was, which I find kind of amazing with this whole Walk the Last Mile.
My dad's name was Louis Madsen, and he never used his middle name. And the family had a tradition until I came along of the son being given the father's first name as a middle name. So my grandfather was Louis Moritz Madsen, and that was a relationship I would have absolutely. My great grandfather, was the same thing. That was a couple where I would have loved to have been the fly on the wall at their dinner parties. She was basically a communist, and he was about as conservative as you could be. So I'm guessing their dinner parties were pretty interesting. But another thing that was mentioned, I think Eric mentioned this to me, was whether or not this is art or documentary photography or what this is and like what I consider this. And my answer is I consider this photojournalism. Photo essay, it falls in the category of photojournalism. It tells a story. Hopefully it tells it well, but it tells a story, which is what photojournalism should do. And it should also hopefully capture or elicit some emotions. I hope that this does for everyone that came through here today, that there was something here that made them feel something. The other thing I was asked to talk about a little bit is kind of my my story of how, why this is all on film, my film story. That the lady sitting right up here, right there, the lady, the one and only Maureen Powers, who, best known for her ownership of Buckwright Studio. Did I get that right? When she decided to close the storefront part, I did a story on her for the paper. And she had all this beautiful medium format equipment. And through conversation and some cash and 10 cents on the dollar, I managed to make a deal to purchase the stuff. And of course, when I started going to pick stuff up, it turns out it wasn't just cameras I was getting. There was film tanks, there was reels, there was trays, there was an enlarger, there was a sink. So literally everything but the darkroom sink. And so I didn't really have an excuse anymore because there was actually some film and some developer that came with this stuff. So I went out and shot some fan pictures. And the very second that I processed those first rolls of film and saw those negatives, it instantly ignited my passion for photography again. It helped me remember why I had gotten attracted to photography in the first place back in those days. And so it's just sort of took on a life of its own.
After seeing all this, I want my stuff back. I've changed my mind.
No! No! Could I interest you in a free book? So it was a bug that just sort of bit. And so then I started doing some 35mm work, and then I started, you know, there was a disruption in the force when you start doing film photography. People find out about it, and then the next thing you know, it's like that. You guys ever seen that drawing where they're trying to explain how gravity works in Einstein's physics? You know, the rubber thing with the ball in the middle of it where everything sort of flows down? Okay, that's what happens, except you're the little ball down there at the bottom, and people that are sitting over here that have an old enlarger or an old camera or whatever, it all starts sliding down. And the next thing you know, it's more and more weight, and you're a black hole. So a lot of stuff ended up sort of sliding in. 90% of it is still there. I eventually converted a laundry room into a dark room. And with film, it wasn't just rekindling my passion for photography. It wasn't just the, oh cool, I can do this again. That was some of it, but there's a big difference in the way film is used and the way it renders things and the way digital is used in the way it renders things. They're different mediums, and I'm not going to stand up here and bash digital, because that would be like an oil painter standing up here and bashing acrylics. Okay, it makes no sense whatsoever. They're just different mediums, and if you like one, you like one. If you don't, you don't. You like something else. And then some fourth guy is going to come up and say, well, I like egg tempera. Well, I like making frescoes. Before you know it, they're having a brawl. Film for me is a very tactile, hands-on photography experience. I buy film in bulk. I load it into the cassettes myself. Everything about shooting film is tactile and hands-on. You got to load it into the camera. Most of the film cameras are manual. You have to focus it yourself. You have to set your own exposure. You have to advance the film. It doesn't do anything for you. If you have it set wrong, you get a roll of garbage, or nothing at all. And once you're done, once you've exposed your film, then you have to do more hands-on stuff with it. You can put it in an envelope and send it off somewhere, But I take it in the darkroom, so it has to be taken out of the cassette. Somebody's been doing this, they're smiling back there. Love seeing that. So you gotta process the film, and then when you've processed the negatives, you have a choice then what to do with it. Some film photographers never take it past the negative. They'll scan their images and that's the end of that. If they ever decide to print, they have digital prints made. For this show and for other work, I did not take that route. The digital part of it was simply an editing process. These are actual prints made in the darkroom on actual photo paper, the way it used to be done back in the day when there was no digital photography. And this is also a very tactile, hands-on process. It's a very subjective process. Any given negative, there's 10 different ways to print it. A lot of these that you see here, parts of the image have been made darker, parts of the image have been made lighter. I think there's only one image in here. Actually, no, there isn't. None of these are completely what you call a straight print. There's no burning or dodging. All had a little something done to them. And there's a feel to a regular silver print that you don't get with a digital print. To me, digital prints, some that are really good, but to me they're kind of lifeless. It's ink on paper. This is metallic silver on paper. And it gives a certain look and a certain feel that you can't get with other things. So that's why I do it. And it is a hard taskmaster. It's a lot harder taskmaster than digital imaging is because nothing that you do with film is reversible. Once you've decided to take a roll of film, say through a yellow filter, that roll of film is taken through a yellow filter. You can't change sensitivity mid-roll. If it's 400 speed film, it's 400 speed film, one end to the other. If you decide you're going to process it a certain way to get a certain effect, once you process it, that's it. There's no going back. And if you're processing for printing, you're processing different than if you're printing for scanning. And so there's no going back. It's like a ratchet. You know, click up, click up, click up, click up. It just keeps going, it never stops. Yeah, it's time for, somebody wrote I love you on this. Barbara.
Sorry. Really frick.
Maybe it was Frack. Am I Frack or Frick? I can never remember.
You're Frack.
I'm Frack. Frick. That was a stunt that me and Nelson pulled at work. We had a very unhappy, negative person that thought that for some reason me and Nelson were bumping the seniority list and getting trips that we weren't supposed to and weren't entitled to. We weren't. But she made her unhappiness known. And one of her snarky comments was, "Oh, just give it to frickin' Frack over there. They'll take anything." So our dispatcher at the time ever so kindly took and made a couple of T-shirts. One says, "Hi, my name is Frack." The other one says, "Hi, my name is Frick." And we wore them to work on the same day, make sure that she saw them. And it's one of the closest times, other than the time I drug mud into the office during a corporate visit, that I've ever seen someone's head actually come really close to physically exploding. So it was pretty fun. It was really fun. The mud wasn't. It's time for questions. So raise your hands, yell out, throw things. Come on. Larry.
I assume you carry your camera with you on your trips with your truck? And
I do.
Do stop and take photos?
I do. When I first started driving, I had what I called my truck kit. And it was a little bag with a nice durable Nikon, a couple lenses, some filters, some extra film. And the purpose was just that. You know, when I'm going someplace you know, stop, take a few pictures when I see something interesting. The problem I found with it, and I've kind of, now I just carry a little point and shoot film camera in my lunchbox. The problem with it is not the photography, it's what do you do with a full-size semi? When you want to get out and take pictures. They don't fit in that many places.
Sometimes we go back.
And sometimes what it results in is I'm going to have to go back there and check it out on a day when the light's about the same. Sometimes it's like, well, I missed that. It's too bad. But yeah, that's the issue. And if you ever, it's just stopping. You know, it's not. You can get a semi into almost anything. Can you get it back out of the McDonald's drive-thru? Probably not.
Why is it named Walk the Last Mile?
Oh, it's a good question.
Instead of Life's Life. Not that I push for that. Or Life's Journey, because the name is L-E-I-F. And people would go, typo?
It's a good play on words.
I know.
My wife is very fantastic.
That's what you should get that marry a teacher.
So,
I just like the way she held the chalk.
Walk the Last Mile.
The reason it's called Walk the Last Mile was there's a song by a gentleman named James Grant called Walk the Last Mile. And in that song he talks about walk the last mile with you. It's a song about a relationship between two people. And it just kind of, that song just, when the first time I heard it, every time I heard it since, it reminds me very much of my parents and their relationship. They, what was it, July 14th?
I believe it was the 14th. They've been together for 70 years.
Yeah, it was the anniversary of them meeting.
Yeah,
Not their wedding anniversary, but the
No.
anniversary of that meeting, and they were both taking dance classes. And I've never been able to imagine my dad dancing, ever. But they met at these dance classes, and Dad, one of the trips we were home, Dad showed us where it was. So I got to see, that's where my folks met. But that song just reminded me of the relationship, and so I thought this is an appropriate name. Yes, sir.
Did your dad ever reveal his thought process on coming to the U.S. and then many years later on going back to Denver?
I kind of had to extract it from Mom. But the nub of him leaving and coming to the States, part of it was the great American dream, you know, pursuing that. Part of it was the company that he had been at, where he started his work career and still at. He had reached the ceiling. He'd gotten as far as he was ever going to get. The higher positions in the company were never going to go to Dad. They were going to go to one of the owner's two sons. And Dad felt sort of, nope. And it just seemed like it was between Mom being, or his mom being in the States and things just being easier to do here. Starting a business in Denmark is kind of a Byzantine mess. It was just easier for him to come here and do it. And as far as going back, my dad had some health problems. The business eventually closed. He ended up working for his old competitor, who didn't treat him particularly well. And my mom just finally put her foot down and says, "We're done, we're going back." Not every immigrant story is successful as every other one.
Where's your accent?
Where's your accent?
I was 8 years old when we moved here.
Spoke no English.
And I spoke no English. And at that age, little tiny handspring had picked it up pretty easily over summer vacation. I had the tail end of second grade. Third grade was my full year, and when I showed up for school, they decided I didn't need any more English lessons. They just love me to my own thing. So if there's an accent, it's an Iowa accent. Growing up in Nebraska, I didn't realize how nasally Southern Nebraska actually was till I moved to Minnesota. And I spent, there's some malfeasance up there, the first time I went back to Nebraska to visit, it was about 18 months. I come back and people were like, "Where you been? You're moved to the East Coast?" And I'm like, "You sound like you're from Alabama." And so I didn't realize just in that, short distance that there could actually be such a difference. But, we are right on the line here with accents. Highway 20 is the border between the casserole and the hot dish border. Hot dish north of here, and it's casserole
down below.
here
Yeah.
south.
Whether you wash your clothes.
Pop, so you got wash.
Wash or wash.
A boot, no, it's not your boots, it's a boat, or a bow. Crazy stuff, so.
What about the pictures in front of you?
What about the pictures in front of me? Yes. I decided to go in the darkroom last night, and I realized that I didn't really have a picture up here that showed my dad in better days before he was sick. So I found a picture of him that I took on film during our trip there in 2018. And he's just sitting there reading the newspaper. And there's a funny story that goes behind this, and this is going to make Maureen cry again.
The
She had when she was still doing darkroom work, she had a favorite kind of photo paper that Kodak made, and they discontinued it. And so she went out and just bought all that she could, bought it from other people. She literally hoarded this stuff. Like, I think she had a whole bunker somewhere. And so when she was giving me the stuff that she had, she gave me this paper. And she says, "No, you just use this for good stuff. This is sponge-worthy. These are sponge-worthy pictures only." And I'm not a Seinfeld fan, so she had to explain to me what sponge-worthy meant. It's a story about, the character Elaine and the contraceptive sponges, and how she would save them for certain occasions, and so.
So that's a sponge-worthy.
So that's on the sponge-worthy paper.
His favorite picture.
And it's one of my favorite portraits of my dad. I have one here that is under here. It just wasn't that much space, but same stuff. This is my parents in 2018. Just kind of a happy little portrait. I painted some happy trees over here. Stuff. Kind of did the Bob Ross thing on it. And the big one here. This was another one I took in 2018. We were going somewhere. In 2018, we used public transportation everywhere we went. In this trip, we rented a car. If you've never driven in Denmark before, you're in for a treat. We were at a commuter train stop, and we were just sitting waiting for a train. And I just thought that it was just kind of a cute interaction. And one of the things that I love in capturing pictures like this of my parents is that when you look at their facial expressions, these are obviously old people, but you can still see that they just love each other. You can just see that in their facial expressions and the way they lean together. These are people that are still in love. These are people that still think just absolutely the world of each other. And that was true up until the very last moment. That was absolutely true up until the very last moment. And to have that kind of, how lucky can you be to have that kind of a lifelong relationship, that kind of a lifelong love where you are basically with the person that's your soulmate, the person that you're probably supposed to be with. And then I also, I thought about flying some relatives over. Bill, can you fly overseas?
I think I did that.
Did you? In your own plane, or? How much gas is it going to cost?
Oh,
A lot, right?
Yeah.
I went and I had the stuff that's in the show here and some additional images that I would have included it, but I don't have the whole plan to play with. Next time, Harry.
Next time.
Next time. So I put them in kind of in a book form. Put some of the other work that I did while I was there together. Got extra copies if anybody's interested. Yeah. Just it.
I was just curious, because this is the first photo exhibit that I've been to where you're dealing primarily with emotional grief, and your process of turning that grief into an art form, because that's what you've done. I'm just kind of interested, what was the process like for you to
Long, hard, and
be an
painful.
artist? What's that?
Long, hard, and painful.
Mhm.
It wasn't fun.
He would work on it for a while, and then he would get to a point where he would be done.
Yeah.
And it might take a half an hour at the computer or in the dark room. It might take an hour or two or three.
You know, there were times where I just literally got up, walked out of the room.
He
Just left
and
everything.
he would come out and just be spent. And it wasn't like he was lifting weights, it wasn't like he was running, a marathon.
Hell no.
It was,
Chicken leg.
yeah, it was just an emotionally and spiritually draining portion. So.
It's also there's a lot of spirituality to an experience like this. I don't think I want to leave that part out. You do find yourself drawing closer to whatever it is that is out there. I choose to call it God. Everybody can use their own word, but generally in times like this is where I find a lot of comfort.
I looked through all the pictures, and the one thing that stood out the most out of every last one of them was love.
Yes.
Deep, sincere love. I mean, it was, you've heard of Man Ray. Man Ray used to do a lot of beautiful stuff, and to me it's more about beauty than it is losing a loved one. The life of a loved one is much more loving.
Thank you.
Ready?
Any other questions?
Anybody need to throw any, do you have a question back there?
Yeah, I actually had a question. What would you tell somebody that's like new into photography that may be interested in doing something like this?
Just do it. If you've never, I had probably a 25-year career where I've been in things like this. Granted, they were not family members, but been a lot of grief situations, things like that. And I literally just had to start doing it. And it is hard to put yourself in situations like this. But thinking about it, you won't get it done. Grab your camera and go do it. And, find somebody that help you go through the work, help edit it.
Like
Give you
somebody
feedback.
that lives across the street.
Possibly.
So I'm going to turn the podium back to Eric.
All right, well, thank you.
By the way, the Blandens buying the entire collection.
So it'll be under consideration. Thanks again for everybody coming out and supporting Hans and his wonderful talent here. The show will be up until I think June, mid-June. And so there'll be plenty of times to come and see it. Give me about a week or so to get the film or the video up on the YouTube channel. I pull it into an editing
You told me you were
software.
using diminished motion picture film.
No, it's all digital. I'm strictly digital. You don't want to see my film work. It's bad. Anyway, so thank you very much. And remember, if you're not a member, think about becoming one. And if you're not a fan of our Facebook page, follow us, join us, follow us there.
What's the name of the Facebook page?
I think it's just Blanden Art Museum. I think there's probably plenty of food still to eat, so please.
If you want to look at the book, there's one that's open, you can look at.
Yeah, and then also, last thing I'm going to mention is that this summer we do an art festival, and so that's June 14th, so if it's not on your calendar yet, mark it on your calendar. It's a free event. You come, enjoy some artwork, enjoy some music, and it's great fun. So thank you again for coming, and hopefully we'll see you around. Thank you.